Let's talk about the ripple effect. Our choices, our words have consequences. When we think about what starts that ripple, we can use this idea and this concept around being a pebble. And if we want to create that ripple effect, are we going to be that positive pebble or that negative pebble? Our guest today teaches and speaks about ripple effect leadership and being a leader that is making that positive impact or making that negative impact within their organization. He's going to talk to us today about building high trust in our teams, in our leadership, in our organizations, even as we live in this world of a low trust world. What I love about this simple concept of ripple effects is that it can impact us individually. It's a concept that we can talk to our tiny humans about. It's a concept that is relatable for our teams and our organizations, and it's industry agnostic. And as we think about this ripple effect, it's a mindset change. It's a shift. And it's going to activate a new way of thinking that could really impact the world for good. So what kind of pebble are you going to be today? Let's drop into the conversation with Chris Rollins. Welcome to the GSD Factor podcast. I'm your host, Misha Blameyer-Farish, and today I am so excited to have Chris Rollins joining me. Hi, Chris. How are you today?
Hi, Misha. I am doing well, thank you. As I was saying before the call, I'm not in my office because it's been taking on water from all these Florida storms, but we're rolling with the punches.
You're pivoting. You're being agile.
Yes, all good. No worries.
Well, Chris, I'm so excited for our conversation today, and we're going to talk about your ripple effect leadership framework because I think it's so important, and I think it's a really important message today, especially in our corporate spaces. But before we dive into that, would love for you to share a little bit about you and your story with our listeners today.
Yeah, thanks, Misha. Well, maybe I'll take you back to when I was a kid. When I was 6 years old, my dad bought me my first set of golf clubs. As an avid golfer growing up. By the time I was 8, I was, watching Phil Mickelson on TV while I was chipping in this little practice area I set up in my living room. And junior year, I actually went to a boarding school for golfers, even though it meant, leaving my family, my friends, breaking up with my girlfriend, Lindsay, at the time. But it all paid off. I get a scholarship to play Division I at Davidson College. And, I'm moving in my freshman year, and I meet this guy across the hall. His name is Chase. And Chase and I become fast friends, hanging out together all the time. But one afternoon, we're in my room talking, and I noticed I just sort of fade out the words that he's saying, and now I'm just watching his lips move, and I'm thinking, he's kind of cute. And, later that night, we're pre-gaming on the hall with the guys like we always do, and we're exchanging glances. I even pretend to point at something across the room just to graze his hand, and it's like a jolt of electricity runs through my body. And the next morning, I wake up and there's Chase laying next to me, right? And I know what happened last night, but I know I am not gay. Chase leaves and we don't say a single word. 2 weeks later, I wake up and there's Chase in my bed again. And that night, I look myself straight in my eyes in the bathroom mirror and I say, what the heck is wrong with you? But that summer, when I kissed Chase for the first time, I know. So we go back to school that fall and we are keeping things on the down low. Nobody knows what's going on. 3 weeks later, my dad's been calling me and calling me, and I'm just ignoring him because, he only ever wants to talk about 3 things: golf, grades, and girls. And I don't know how to tell him about Chase, but I know I got to tell him, So he's coming to visit me at a golf tournament in Georgia, and I say I'm going to tell him then. So 3 weeks later, we're at this restaurant having dinner, and I'm just pushing food around my plate, trying to find the right words to share. And finally, he's about to sign the dinner check. And I say, Dad, I'm gay and I'm happy. His name is Chase. And Dad literally drops the pen that he's using to sign the check. And then he looks at me and he says, I am so proud of you. That's awesome. And later that night, I think, well, that went really, really well. But I know, Misha, I know it might not have. But it did because my dad made me feel safe, seen, and accepted. And the way he showed up in that moment, the way he handled that one conversation was a key reason I was able to become SVP of organizational development at a $40 million company with 200 employees by the age of 30. And it's why today I get so much joy out of helping organizations develop leaders who create those same kind of ripple effects for their people. Because how you show up today, tomorrow, the next day will certainly have an impact 5, 10, or 20 years from now. So that's really the inspiration behind ripple effect leadership. And I'm happy to jump in more to talk about what that means, what that looks like, who it helps, and who it serves.
Thank you for sharing your story, because I think there are so many individuals out there that have that story, but I think there's so many other individuals that don't have that story. Thank you for sharing it so beautifully, transparently, and vulnerably. And, kudos to your dad for giving that space and having and being present with you in that moment, and being with you and kind of embracing you in that beautiful moment. And I, commend him as well.
Well, one of the things, Misha, if
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
may say, is I love my dad, and my dad certainly is a very supportive and loving dad. And I know he loves that I'm out telling the story because it certainly makes him look good too. But something I always say is, yes, while, people will hear my story and they're like, Chris, you're so lucky, that your dad responded that way. But here's the thing. Yes, I am so privileged in a lot of ways, and I am so fortunate that I had that experience. But one of the reasons my dad was able to have that loving response was because of the work that was laid down for years before I even had that conversation with him by people I've never met, my LGBTQ ancestors who were willing to do what it took to make that conversation over dinner with my dad feel safe. So I was the recipient of a ripple effect that started long before I came along. And that's part of why I'm so committed to creating that ripple forward. So people may say that I'm lucky, but I'm certainly not willing to leave any of that to chance. And so I just like to tie back. It's not just about the moment, it's about what happened before and what we're doing now to create opportunities for the future.
I love that, because I think when we think about, the shoes that we're walking in, the path that we're walking in today, yes, was started generations and generations and generations before. And in my, in my own story, in my own book, I talk about my grandfather, and I talk about my own dad, and I talk about those people that have come before us. They didn't have the word GSD. They didn't have the framework of, getting shit done, but they just got it done, and they saw impossible and made it possible. And so I think you and I are both these products of these ripple effects that happened, whether it was ancestors that we knew or ancestors before. And I think that that's really important. And we are walking the actions that we're taking, the transformations that we're helping create, the ceilings, the trailblazing that we're doing today is going to have that ripple effect for generations to come. And I think that living that life of that ripple effect is so important. And so let's dive into it a little bit more. Talk to our listeners a little bit about what that ripple effect leadership framework really means.
So at a high level, what I like to say is that ripple effect leadership is about a more human approach to work that works for every human. So it's really at the intersection of leadership and inclusion. And I think that's a big part of, if you can show up with a ripple effect mindset, which I'll define in a moment, if you as a leader can show up with a ripple effect mindset and create those moments where people feel safe, feel seen, feel heard, you're going to create a space where you're building trust and engagement and inclusion in a way that helps your team collaborate better, communicate better, get shit done faster. And so the ripple effect mindset is really about shifting from the way we think, what I call a siloed mindset, which is where you're so narrowly focused on your tasks, your goals, your agenda, without thinking about the broader context. And we have to shift to a ripple effect mindset, which is about having a keen awareness that your words, your actions, your decisions have far-reaching consequences beyond what's immediately apparent. So the way that you give feedback to someone, the way that you speak up in a meeting when it feels risky, all these choices that you make, acknowledging a colleague who has, a deserving colleague, these small, seemingly insignificant moments that can have, longer term positive impacts. So the ripple effect mindset is really combining 5 qualities: vulnerability, kindness, curiosity, empathy, and humility. And if we can practice those qualities over and over and over again, it's what I call polishing the pebble, because I talk about being the pebble, like making those positive ripples. This is about the work to polish the pebble with these 5 skills over and over and over again. That's how you as a leader are going to create safety and build trust in a way that's going to allow for deeper, more meaningful conversations and relationships. That's going to help transform culture and change inside organizations.
You've talked to hundreds of organizations. You've been in organizations. What do you think is that biggest struggle that organizations have that truly need this ripple effect mindset?
Yeah. It's funny because you hear these things like vulnerability, kindness, curiosity, empathy, humility. These are not new to anybody, right? These are things that we all know about, probably things that you're teaching your kids or that you were taught as a kid to be kind to one another, right? But when I talk to organizations and when I go into companies, people, they know these things, but are they really practicing them on a regular basis? And for all of the dozens of companies, hundreds of companies I've spoken with, there's not a single case where there can't be improvement in at least, one or all of these areas, right? And so we just get swept up in the work. I was just with a biopharma company who got FDA approval on their big first drug, huge milestone for their company. They were running 1,000,000 miles an hour leading up to that milestone. And their culture really took a hit because they weren't treating each other with respect. They were, losing all the values that they held close. And so me coming in was a real reset moment for them to slow down, to recenter on the fact that we're all human beings with emotions and feelings and desires and motivations. And I think the concept of the ripple effect is just really easy to grasp, and it's memorable. And what's exciting is that when I come in and speak to an organization and then I leave, there's just natural momentum that this just like these ripples and waves continue, because people say, my client was like, I was having a rough day and my colleague said to me, are you being the pebble right now? Are you ripple affecting right now? And so they're like checking each other with this language, which is really cool.
I love that. And I think so many times, organizations have these seasons, right? It's a season of doing, it's a season of being, it's a season of scaling and growing. And I think so many times they think like, oh, we have to put personal things aside. We've got to put personal feelings aside. But at the end of the day, they shouldn't, right? They need to continue to maintain that respect and that kindness, that empathy towards one another, because organizations, the biggest asset they have are the people. And maintaining that mindset, that positive mindset, can be so impactful to organizations. And yes, there are certainly seasons of doing and getting shit done, but countering those seasons of being present and resetting and slowing down in order to speed up again later, I think is really those reset moments that a lot of organizations forget about.
I think slowing down to speed up is so spot on. And it doesn't have to be a whole wide company initiative to kind of reset. But I think in engaging with people on your team, new hires, people that you've worked with for years, take the time up front to get to know them, to listen, to ask questions, to be a coach, so that you build that trust, you form those relationships that allows you to do the work again faster, with more velocity, with more purpose, and with a lot of care too.
And I also think if organizations will take some of these concepts, especially this ripple effect concept, it will actually allow them for greater success. It's going to allow them to scale. It's going to allow them to grow, and it's going to be a non-toxic environment, right? It's going to continue to edify the people and the individuals that are there doing the work and doing the important work that's in front of them. And I think, what would you say to those leaders that think, oh, well, if I need to maintain my edge, I need to maintain this persona? What would you say to them as a counter to that, to say, no, we need to be empathetic, we need to be kind,
Mhm.
we need to be all these things?
Yeah. The line I like to say is that trust is the byproduct of human-centered leadership, and human-centered leadership is the byproduct of ripple effect thinking. And so it really has to start with the way that we think, the way that we approach our work. And a big part of that is really seeing the people on our teams as human beings with complex motivations and desires, and all of that is part of the equation. And we can get things done, like get FDA approval in a short amount of time, but at what expense, right? And there's such a long-term game. That's the part of this ripple effect mindset. Is in a siloed mindset, we're thinking about short-term wins. In a ripple effect mindset, we're thinking about being committed to long-term success. And so there's over and over again, there's collateral damage to the human element of what we're doing if we're not putting that front and center. And so there's plenty of data that people can show and to support in those conversations. But if you're not treating your people in that way, you're going to lose people, and you've got a bigger problem, a bigger headache to deal with.
So we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast, and growing the innovation and the entrepreneurial ecosystem, I think, is really exciting. I think it's going to bring about amazing changes in the world. But I think a lot of times I hear, as I mentor a lot of these entrepreneurs, is how do I trust, right? And you talk a
Mm.
lot about building that high trust in a low trust world. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with the word trust and what that means. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and there's such an interesting debate around, do I trust by default, or does someone have to earn my trust, right? And the way that I thought about this is, if you're going to hire somebody, if you're going to go through the process to hire someone and bring them onto your team, that should be enough of a commitment to say you trust this person. So if you hire me onto your team, you're an entrepreneur and you're bringing on, maybe it's your first hire or third hire or fifth hire, and it's a big investment, it's an emotional thing for you. I want to know that because of that hire, like, you trust me to get everything done. So I think that's number one, is if you're going to make a hire someone that you can put your full trust in. And they may do things that maybe question your trust over time, but you start by fully giving them your trust. So that's the first thing that I would say. I personally don't believe in earning trust. If you're going to be hiring someone to do the job, hire them because you trust in them and empower them to get the job done. I think it's just a much more powerful position to be in, from a team leadership standpoint. But we are living in a time where a trust in people, trust in institutions, trust in government is super low, right? And there's a stat that Edelman put out in their report beginning of last year that said 4 in 5 people are unwilling to work with someone who disagrees with their point of view. And it's a pretty high percentage. And so my whole position is, it shouldn't matter where you are, where you're from, who you love, what you look like, or even who you vote for. If we can all create opportunities by using this ripple effect mindset to connect with each other as human beings, to see each other's character, to see the people living beneath the stories that we're creating about everybody else, then that's how we can create connection and build trust at a time when it feels really tricky to do. And you have to bring a level of humility to that. You have to bring a level of curiosity to that, to empathy. All of these qualities center on this idea of building trust with other people.
I love that. And I think it's so important because in this day and age, to your point, there is a lack of trust across the globes. And so, how do we cultivate that? How do we ignite that? How do we grow that? And I was recently talking to another podcast guest, and she was talking about if we replace self criticism with self coaching,
Mm.
and just a little bit a day, what an impact that would be. And I wonder, Chris, does that apply to trust? Do we start trusting in small increments, and will it grow and will it ripple throughout our lives?
I think so. I mean, you think about different situations where you've met people, and obviously, we're talking about hiring people on your team. That's different from, meeting someone at a gym and building a friendship and relationship. There's like trust builds in different ways depending on the context. But I do think there's like this energy around trust building that scales as that trust lever moves more to the right. And so as you build more trust, you have more capacity to get stuff done. And it is sort of like that outward movement of that ripple. So as you build that trust, other positive impacts come around with it. So I like that. I like that perspective.
When you are thinking about, you're obviously doing amazing impacts in the corporate space. We've talked about, entrepreneurs. Maybe we can talk to the parents of our audience members, right? I have two tiny humans, and I love this ripple effect concept because, they love tangible things, right? So let's put on a lens for a moment. If I'm a parent and I'm listening to this podcast and I want my kids to have a ripple effect in their lives, what are some of those mindsets or those thoughts that as a parent, which being a parent is very much being like a leader sometimes in the
Oh
corporate
yeah.
space. So let's talk a little bit about that. I really want our parents to walk away from this conversation too, going, oh, I can start to make a ripple effect, not just in my corporate space, but also within my family.
Well, it's a great question, and thanks for bringing it to that space because when I talk about this, I really believe that we can make change on our teams, in our families, in our communities, out in the world. Like that's the essence of the bigger picture here. And so the one thing I'll say is, metaphors are helpful, and I think that's why the ripple effect really sticks. And so one of the things I talk about is you are the pebble. Everywhere you go, you are creating ripples, whether you realize it or not, and you have to get present to the impact that those ripples are having on other people. So in the context of parenting, it's and by the way, I'm not a parent. I am a dog dad. I am an uncle many times over. So I can't relate directly to the challenges of parenting, but I certainly see it from the outside. I think using this language, even with your kids, to say, just imagine throwing a pebble in a still pond. What happens? Okay, these ripples move outward. Imagine that you are the pebble. You're creating this impact in the people around you. So when you're playing with your friends, like what sort of impact do you want to be having when you go to this, to the playground, et cetera. And so as a parent and as a leader, there is a certain level of responsibility and sort of weight. The weight of that responsibility can sometimes be almost overwhelming. But if you keep coming back to the qualities of vulnerability, humility, curiosity, even if you do things that maybe were a misstep, you can keep coming back to those things to say, I was wrong in saying that, or I approached this the wrong way. How can I view this differently? And continue to apply those qualities as a filter through which you parent, lead, and go out in the world.
It's so good. We talk about with our tiny humans, our choices have consequences. So,
Mm.
so if you're going to make this choice, what's that consequence? And we talk about like, let's think about what the consequences are down the road or what's the waterfall effect. And so I
Mm.
love this. I love this ripple effect, but the pebble concept, because I think that can be understood at such a young age. And I think that it's something that can be carried throughout, right? Both of my kids are very involved in sports. And so as we are teaching them leadership, whether it's through their martial arts or their sports and with their teams, I think we can talk about what's that pebble effect going to be with your team or as you're in school and as you're being that leader. And I think if we start them at this young age, it's going to follow them throughout their high school and then their post high school plans. And it is going to affect the economy and it's going to affect the culture in our countries. And I think we can start these concepts at an early age with this very simple concept that can truly have those ripple effects down the road.
Exactly. And I think what we haven't exactly touched on as much is that the ripple effect works both ways, right? It works in the positive way and it also works in a negative way. And I I often reflect on how my life would be different if my dad responded a different way in that single conversation. I mean, that could have completely changed the trajectory of my life, how I felt about myself. And obviously, I see it over and over again with people in this community who didn't have that same experience as me. And it's part of a reason why I hesitated to share my story for so long, because I had this almost sense of guilt in the positive experience that I had. But as I learn more, there is so much power in sharing the joy, sharing positive stories in this community, and empowering other people and parents to be that person who and have examples of people who showed up the right way, who took the moment to pause and respond rather than react from a place of fear or judgment or what have you. All things that parents and kids can learn from. And something I do with teams, which is something that could happen in schools and communities, is creating ripple effect campaigns inside of teams and organizations where we're actually writing acknowledgments, thoughtful, deep acknowledgments to colleagues, to even people in their lives, to share that. And something I do with my clients is I have them write a list of all the people in their life that they can remember back, from teachers and parents and strangers and baristas and anybody who's influenced them, who've created ripple effect moments in their life. And as they create these lists, almost every time they say, I don't think people on my list know that they're on my list. And how amazing would it be if all the people on your ripple effect moments list knew what an impact that they had on your life? And these are not complex topics or ideas, but they're powerful in their simplicity, I think. And that's what I appreciate about it.
I love that. I think that that is such a easy exercise that a leader can do. But I think as a parent or a teacher or a coach or even a mentor, right? I think that that's such a powerful exercise to do, to say, like, who are those people? And then to challenge them to say, now tell them, and thank them and walk in that gratitude of what they've done in your life. I think that that's truly important and puts that positive energy into the world as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when Chris thinks about, and some of the attributes have creeped in, which I love, but talk to us about, when we think about that GSD factor life of being confident, inquisitive, imaginative, being present, resilient, and influential. When you think about Chris and your ripple effect leadership, what are those one or two attributes that really pop out and resonate for you?
Well, if I take this question and I really think about it for myself in a self-reflection, how do I really think about my work and me in the ripple effect? The first word that jumps out is confidence, because it's been a journey for me to get on stage in front of hundreds of people, and in many cases virtually in front of thousands of people, and share my story, especially at a time where our political climate is so sort of volatile. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And luckily, I haven't been met with too much resistance, but there certainly have been instances where I'm there sort of questioning myself. And the power of this work, and anybody's work, all the entrepreneurs listening, the power of your work is really directly tied to the power that you feel, in yourself. And there's been such a journey around confidence building to be able to go out and share this story and sort of do that unapologetically. The second thing that jumps out is just the influential. And I'm really inspired by the stories and the comments and the feedback that I get from working with people who, message me and say, oh my gosh, I immediately went home and talked to my husband and my brother about the ripple effect. And I think we all have the opportunity to create this impact in the world by slowing down, by embracing these 5 qualities, to connect with people who are different from us, And at a time when trust is low and polarization is high, like we have a responsibility and opportunity to connect with each other as human beings and really see the good in each other. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Love that. All right. My final question, which is my favorite question this year. What are you powerfully choosing, Chris, in 2024?
Okay. I am two things that I'm powerfully choosing. Number one is 2023 for me was a year of like big investment in self and growth and learning and pivoting my business to really go into the world of full-time speaking. And so 2024 has been really building off a lot of the amazing momentum that that's created for me. But the thing that pops up for this year is really about like turning pro. And I've been out, on my own in this business for 5 years, and I've sort of self-built everything, with a lot of help from coaches. But when it comes to marketing, branding, style, website, all these things, I'm just really taking it to the next level and elevating the experiences that I create for clients, the leave behinds, the collateral, all of that stuff is just really taking it to the next level. So turning pro is kind of what I'm powerfully choosing. And the second thing, as I shared earlier in my story, I am an avid golfer. I now live in Florida from New York originally, but surrounded by great opportunities for golf. And I'm powerfully choosing to get out and golf more, to network via golfing, to invite people out to golf because it's really my happy place. And I often make the excuses like, oh, I have other things that I should be doing as an entrepreneur that are getting in the way. But how important is it for us to be doing the things that bring us joy?
Amazing. All right. What is that final drop you want to leave for our listeners today?
Oh my, what an invitation. My mind is now just like swirling around the world of like politics and division. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. But what I will say is, when we think about DEI and organizations and inclusion, there's so much work to do. And, in a single hour, in a single session, in a single keynote, we're not going to solve the racism problem. We're not going to solve the mental health crisis. We're not going to resolve any disparate opinions about access to healthcare or gender expression. But what every single person can do is show up and make a difference for the person directly in front of them, to make sure that everybody on their teams and their families and their schools, the kid on the bus that no one talks to, feels safe, feels seen, feels heard. And if we can all do that, just focus on the person directly in front of us. If we can create a space where all of that happens, I believe that the ripple effect is that all these big problems get taken care of, and we're the last generation of people to deal with them. And so that is my mic drop moment.
Amen. I'll take it. Chris, thank you so much. It's been such an honor having you. Loved this conversation. Thank you to our GST Factor listeners. And don't forget to get shit done.
Thanks for listening to the GST Factor podcast. If you liked this episode, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, where you can also find previous episodes. Let's also connect on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you're looking for more information on the GST Factor, visit us at gsdfactor.com. And always remember to GSD, get shit done.